Thanks for tuning in to the Really Platform podcast, sponsored by Packspace and hosted by me, James Brooke, and Paul Rogers. We bring you interviews of industry thought leaders, the C-suite of tech companies and leading retail brands that help you understand e-com strategy and make better technology decisions. In return, all we ask is you tell other people about the podcast, share and like our posts on LinkedIn, and if you're new to the show, give us a rating wherever you are listening. So let's set up our new episode, and then we'll introduce you to our wonderful guest. So today's your chance to learn from the ex-founder and CEO of Amplience, who scaled them into market-leading global DXP. And the ex-founder of Anthropology, which he grew into $200 million plus retailer. So there's some serious e-commerce and technology experience in the room today. And our topic is around smarter inventory management, fixing in-stock not online issues and driving better automation and efficiency in businesses with Sweft. So let's start with a warm intro to James Brooke, who's been on the podcast before in his days at Amplience, who's now the CEO at Sweft. Hey, James, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, James. And hi, Paul. Great to be back, I have to say. It's been a sort of longish absence, but there's a lot of water, gone under the bridge since then. We've had pandemics and goodness knows what else. And I left Amplience, but that was a great ride. So delighted to be here to talk about Sweft and really to bring Michael with us because he really is the expert on all things in stock, not online and retail. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. Thanks for joining us today. And Michael, a warm welcome to the podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, thanks, and really happy to be here. I just feel a little left out because I don't have the right accent, but I'll muddle on and hope that you guys can understand me with my full American accent.
Well, I've read enough reports saying that the American accent's considered generally more friendly. So I think the listeners will enjoy it more than ours. They're probably bored of me and Paul anyway by now. Let's start. I'd love you to just give people a little bit of background, your founder story, what brought you into Sweft, because you've obviously got a stack of experience in scaling a major e-commerce retailer. So can you tell us a bit about that and how that led into the Sweft side?
Yeah, so basically I'm what I would call a lifer in retail. I started in retail when I was 14 and have been in sort of management roles in retail for the past over 30 years. Really starting in and working across all areas of retail, starting in buying, planning, marketing, across, operational areas. So I've really touched a lot of different parts of the puzzle in retail. And in key, I've sort of worked between a lot of departments and helped sort of help their collaboration and coordinate the different departments in different roles. When I started, I basically wrote the business plan for and launched Anthropology. I didn't start the business Anthropology, but I launched their e-commerce business. I started actually as a catalog. This is back in '98. And then realized that there was this opportunity in the e-commerce world and sort of added an e-commerce website onto it and ran that direct-to-consumer business for 13 years in the U.S., 10 years in the U.S. and 3 years in launching it in the U.K. and for the European market. So really, managing all areas from, operations, call center, everything, IT, all areas of that business, including obviously the merchandising and marketing parts of it. So really got a great deal of experience there. The founder story really comes from while we were, when we launched, we really were a catalog business, and we had this sort of sideline of an e-commerce website, which is kind of at the time people really used it a lot for clear out your markdowns if you're a catalog business. And then there came a point where we were really having trouble scaling the catalog because, retail, you have to add new stores, and that's a huge step function to grow the business. In catalog, you have to mail out tons more catalogs. So that's really sort of a high expense. So we were looking ways to sort of start scaling the business and saw that there was a lot of response in customer side to newness on the website. So whenever we put something new up, we could just see how it would fly out the door. So we're like, okay, here's this opportunity. And we really dove in and went for, we doubled the assortment one summer, really looking to see, some significant growth in the business. And we're surprised at the end of the summer to only have seen like 15% growth. And, despite the huge increase in the assortment. And at the end, my planning manager came to me in October and said, Michael, we've got a problem. We've got $1 million worth of unsold inventory from summer that never actually even made it online. So we were sitting on all this inventory throughout. And my first thought is, of course, I've got to go into my financial review meeting and explain to the CEO why I've got $1 million of inventory that I just sort of sat on for no reason. So I talked to my team and said, hey, what happened? And they all did this. Like, okay, it was somebody else's fault. Somebody dropped the ball. This is what didn't happen. That didn't happen. And what that told me is that it wasn't a people problem because everyone was trying really hard. And it wasn't one person dropping the ball, but something was falling down across the board. And I really saw that where the key piece was is that they just didn't have the right tools to make it happen, to get the products, to manage the process. And there was, we, like a lot of people, of course, excuse me, 1 second. We had a catalog process. We had a retail process and we had a catalog process in the business. And so we're sort of band-aiding e-commerce onto that and making that, sort of making it fit. And that wasn't working because we were using spreadsheets like we did in catalog. Works fine for a single project where everything's the same. But when you have product moving in and out and very rapid change in what's coming in, when it arrives, and a lot of variability, it just doesn't work. So that's what told me that, I need to do something different. So I worked with a developer and came up with a tool that helped us organize the process, get everyone working from the same set of information, and really helped us sort of move everything into the same process and one singular process, even though everything had completely different cadence. It could all be part of one process. And it worked really well. The next season, we were able to launch all the products on time. We really saw that lift in business that we were looking for, and continued to grow the business. And what was really key is that we were able to grow the business without that step function. We actually were getting a lot of leverage of the resources we had, both from people and tool perspective, and really, saw a lot of growth and an increase in profitability very quickly. And that was one of the challenges from the beginning. It was getting that high cost marketing cost of a catalog business, getting it to be a profitable business. So there was a lot of learning there. What was interesting is that this was really focused on the e-commerce business, but the retail buying team saw what was happening and said, "Wow, we really want a part of that because that's working really well. You guys are able to do a lot of things that we can't." And so they joined on, and then just different parts of the business wanted to join in. It became really the tool that ran sort of the product process for all of Anthropologie, not just the e-commerce business. Then, Urban Outfitters, which is a sister company, saw it and said, "Wow, we want part of that." So they joined it. So it became, for Urban Inc. and the 6 brands, it became the sort of product tool for the business. Also, for me, when I moved to the UK, it was really great because suddenly I had this great source of information and a process that I could slip right into and with a much smaller team, be able to sort of emulate what the US was doing in a very effective way. So it was really very, something that was an essential part of my career at Anthropologie. When I left and went out and did a lot of consulting, I was really surprised to see that other people didn't have it. I sort of assumed other people had figured this out and knew, how to solve this. And I kept on going from one company to another and seeing, consulting on marketing strategy and many other things, but seeing that they all struggled with the same issue of not having a clear process, having a lot of delays in getting products live, and the teams complaining about how difficult it was for them to actually get products live on the site. And I wasn't coming out saying I've got this tool. I was just talking to them about how their business ran, and that just kept on coming up as a problem in retailer after retailer. So totally, a light bulb went off, and I said, maybe there's an opportunity here, and that led me to launch Sweft, because I really feel like this is a key piece for the retail industry. And again, I sort of look at it from a different perspective. I look at it, both from the front end, but I also really see how the holistic aspect of the business and how everything fits together, and how essential it is for everyone to be working from, playing from the same sheet of music, as it were. And that's really not what happens in retail, because there's a lot of silos and a lot of completely different processes and different teams working at different cadences, and somehow, magically supposed to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting when you say that, because it reminds me, Michael, that we first met when you became an Amplience customer, because you came over to London to launch Anthropologie into Europe. So we got to know you very well then. And Michael started talking to me about the software business sort of, in sort of 2014, 15 that he wanted to launch. We realized at Amplience actually that it was the front end it was the back end process that really powered that front end experience. If you didn't get really good, high quality product data, your product experience was going to be broken. So we started talking about this, I think, 2016, 2017, didn't we? And then I think, ultimately you pulled it all together and launched the product. But it gave us an opportunity at Amplience to think about how all those pieces would fit together. So when I left the company back in January of last year, one of the first people to give me a call actually was Michael. And I was like, great, fantastic, because we kept running into this problem at Amplience all the time, which was that we'd do the big dog and pony show around content management, and then half the team would come up to me and go, but that's not really our problem. Our problem is we're working out of thousands of spreadsheets and we're trying to manage this complex, multifunctional process, loads of departments involved, etc. But at Amplience, we just didn't solve it. So it just felt to me like unfinished business. So I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to come on board, because I think this is a big problem that many retailers don't even understand that they have in quite the fidelity that they should.
Patchwork's the world's most modern integration platform. We can connect any key e-commerce system, from storefronts to marketplaces and ERPs to fulfillment solutions. This allows retailers and partners alike to simplify their tech stack integration and do away with point-to-point vendor-specific apps. We can automate and streamline the flow of data across your entire e-commerce business. Find out more at wearepatchworks.com.
Yeah, I find this really interesting, because we talk a lot about like the importance of inventory, and not just getting the right inventory on, but having the availability and having the visibility of it. And that is, you're right, it's back end, it's process, it's silos. I'd love to know from your experience, because obviously you've done this scaling a large retailer online, and you've worked with other businesses now, obviously as a vendor. What is the biggest issue, do you think? Is it business culture, because people are working isolated and making isolated technology decisions? Is it a lack of ownership of end-to-end process? Is it all of that? Because I've certainly seen it where, a buy-in team has got their own product lifecycle management tool over here. There might be an ERP involved where the SKUs get set up and the POs get raised, and then there might be a link between the two. There might not. They might be manual. Then you've got maybe a PIM. Then you've got e-commerce. You've got all these different places, but typically they're not integrated. So what do you think is the biggest cause, or is it just varying so much from business to business?
Yeah, I think, it really is both. It's primarily that there are, you said there's PLM and then there's the ERP, but actually in between there is where the buyers reside, because it's actually design that's in PLM, and it's the planners that are in the ERP, and the buyers are typically in spreadsheets. And so there's all this key effort that they're making early in the process that's just being gathered in spreadsheets and isn't necessarily flowing down through the rest of the process. So there's lots of really great information and key information that gets lost early in the process. But it's because there are all these different systems and people working in different systems that other people don't touch, that information and fidelity gets lost throughout the process. In addition to that, because it's widespread, because it's not just one problem within the company, there's lots of pain points and lots of blood in the water, or blood on the floor, I think, or whatever you call that, James. And I think is blood on the carpet. Thank you. But it's spread across so broadly that it's really hard to pinpoint for when you look at the people who are making decisions about how to make this change in the business and this change in their approach. It's very hard for them to see where it is. So they're constantly playing whack-a-mole and saying, okay, the problem is breaking down in copywriting. We're going to fix the copywriters. They put all this resource. They add a bunch of new copywriters. They get an outside agency. They do all these things to get it going. And it's like, okay, that's flowing. Wait, the copy's still not flowing. Oh, because they're not getting information from this group. So then it's this whack-a-mole that they have to play, and it's not effective. And that's exactly what I was doing back in the day, was trying to figure out, how do I solve this, and kept on trying it. We couldn't, because it's spread so broadly, and you have to solve all of them in order to solve the problem, not just one. So I think that one of the big challenges is that because it's widespread within the company, it's difficult for the executives and the people who make the decisions to understand exactly how to solve it.
Great. And then I guess next question. So obviously it's a tough environment at the minute. Lots of businesses not trading as well as they have been over the last few years. And this is most relevant to businesses, I guess, changing or have high stock turnover or bringing a lot of new products online. What's the business case? Like, why should people prioritize this in the current kind of economic climate?
Well, I think there's two parts to that. on the one hand, I just sort of want to touch on the idea that it's only companies that have a very high turnover that this matters for, because it's actually companies that have a small assortment can also benefit tremendously, because they've got a small assortment, and and I'm not talking about 20 items. If they have a couple thousand products over the course of the year, they've got to make every one of those work, and they've got to make sure they've got all the details right and all the information right. And often they want to, for that to be successful, they have to be able to provide that information effectively. And if they don't, then they don't have more products to fall back on. They've got, each one of those has to work really well. So I think, we have a customer who has only 2,000 products, and it is really essential for their business to make sure that every single one of them gathers all the information so that they can really market those products really well. Talking about the environment, in my mind, like at this time when business is tough, moving the needle in sales is really tough. It's really expensive. And when that happens, you've got to be able to make sure that your back of your business is highly efficient and you're working really effectively, and you're getting all the benefit of not just the resources, but the products that come through, and the people that you have. You've got to make sure that that's all working really smoothly, or you don't have the profitability to survive the downturn of the market. So I think it's really essential. This is the time when, yes, you continue to put, to invest in the future. You continue to, put money towards things that are going to make a difference when business is strong. But I think it's times like this that it's absolutely essential that retailers kind of dial back a little bit on the front end and focus very heavily on making sure that their business is highly efficient.
It's interesting.
James, do you want to add to that? I know you've... Go ahead. Sorry. Did you want to go add to
that? I didn't have anything to say, James, so off you go.
Cool. A link question. I guess Michael or James, whoever wants to take this, is you've got some interesting stats on the website, and I know the e-com industry, we are healthily skeptical about claims. So let's push into that a little bit more. And you've talked about you sat on $1 million worth of stock Anthropology that you can sell. I'm assuming that then leads through to price discounting to clear it, to make way for new seasons. And the stat I saw on your website, which obviously is good attention grabber, is that the in-stock not online can lose 1-2% of full price sales in a matter of days, etc., costing millions in margin erosion. So can you talk to me, how have you come to that data? What's this based on?
So it's interestingly, that's not a number that I made up. It actually came to me from the Gap, and talking to them about this same problem. And it's a simple math in retail that there's a certain lifespan for a product. It's peak selling opportunity for a certain amount of time. So my favorite example is a long sleeve long sleeve polo, let's say. It really has its peak selling between, March and April, because it's cool enough that you want the long sleeve, but you want lighter weight product. You don't want a sweater anymore. And you might still sell it in May, but you're only going to sell it at a discount, because any customer going to buy it knows they only have a short amount of time that they're going to wear it before it's too hot to wear long sleeves. So that, there's that time that you can sell it. And you may sell long sleeve polos again in fall, but they're going to be different colors. So like that product has a lifespan. And typically in retail they look at 8-week selling cycles, particularly in apparel. It varies by business, but in apparel it's typically an 8-week selling cycle, and it might be 6 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks in fast fashion, but typically it's around 8 weeks. And it's very simple math. If you take those 8 weeks, it's basically 1.89% per day between when you bring the product in and when it goes on markdown. Because what happens is after 8 weeks, they just mark it down because they've got more product coming in. They've got their open to buy. They've got new inventory coming in that's slated in. They've got to move the goods in order to have room on the shelves in order to sell it. So it's very simple math. If you don't, if you have 8 weeks to sell it, the product, for that product to live, and you miss a week or two of it, you're literally giving away that margin. It's not, and so, when you look at different retailers and even, DIY and garden, there's a season for that. There's a certain amount of time. It might be longer than 8 weeks. Maybe it's 12 weeks. But that's still, when you do the math, it still ends up being over 1% that's disappearing per day. Because if you bring in, a garden bench 6 weeks late in the season, or 2 weeks late, 3 weeks late in the season, you've given away, a significant amount of margin.
I guess related to that, I'm intrigued on your perspective on this, because one of the big issues that e-com and buyers working together have is on gauging demand and making accurate purchases for the next draw. And actually, it strikes me that this ISNO stuff, if you're not got the right inventory online and therefore you're not selling certain ranges, categories, products, the sales data is skewed, which could lead to poor purchase decisions in terms of gauging what the true customer demand is. Because you might only see stuff as discount stock and then go, right, that's not going into core range in future. Is that accurate? Have you seen that? Is that concerns that some of the retailers you work with have?
Yeah, no, we definitely had a lot of interest and concern about that at Anthropology in terms of, how do we measure, how do the planners measure the right sales of product when you didn't know when it actually went live, because you saw some selling in stores, you didn't know when it went live online, and so that would really throw off and obscure the real selling period. And you reminded me one thing I wanted to highlight, which is that it's not just an online problem, because when you look at 60 to 80% of customers making their online purchase decisions, making the purchase decisions online before they go to stores, you realize that they need to see the product in order to know that that's where they want to go. And back to my example of Moxie Polo, if you're looking for them and you go online and you don't see anything that suits me, hits your fancy, you're going to go to a different store. So one of our clients, their key, one of the key reasons for the merchandising team for wanting Sweft is that they saw, people going to their competitors for the product because those products were online at the competitor faster. So they had their consistent tendency to be late in delivering goods online meant that they were actually missing out on sales in store because the product was not online for the customers to trigger the customers to go in. And they couldn't send out emails, advertising the product because it wasn't available when they went online. So, that throws off sales online and in store. It also throws off your selling curve because customers aren't going on. You're saying, okay, that wasn't really a good item, but it wasn't, nobody knew it was there until, 2 weeks late into the season.
Makes sense. And I guess going back to that Sweft business case, which kind of product workflows and manual processes are you either removing or automating from a kind of operational perspective?
I think the interesting thing about it, Paul, is that as Michael says, it's a big interconnected system. So you've got 6 to 8 different departments that are busy trying to do their part of the process. And generally, if you think about the 200 odd data points you need to launch a product, because a lot of the data points you need are internal as well. There's an awful lot of data collection and capture that helps you move that product through the process. Fundamentally, different parts of the business are responsible for different pieces. So, buying team is kind of setting up and managing their assortment. They're uploading that data into the platform. But then you've got, planners looking at that in terms of, managing inventory and sort of when that product's going to land, and marketing team trying to work through whether they actually going to promote that. So they've got a whole bunch of campaigns ready to go, but they're not sure yet whether that product is actually live on site. So they don't want to push that big email out until they're pretty sure. E-com teams trying to, manage all those things between them and make sure the product's actually activated. And you've got the studio folks doing, okay, I've got to set up the studio. I've got to make sure that I've got the right models. I've got to make sure that I've done all the things that I need to do to efficiently get that product photographed and ready to go. And so the challenge fundamentally is that you've got all of these different smaller workflows that have huge dependencies between them. And this is really what Sweft does that really caught my attention, is that Michael's vision for this was, look, you just need to give everybody a single view of where that product is in the process. You've got total visibility of when the product is going to go live, what status it is in, and where it sits in the assortment. And what that gives you is everybody in the team sort of then has all the data that they need to work out what's the next best action. So what should I be doing now? When I come in the morning, which bit of the workflow is most important? Which products should I be working on? And how do I move those products through the process with the right priority to make sure that we hit our targets, so that we're, managing it into the campaign in the right way so that we're going to hit our sales targets. And that's really what's broken. So when you start talking to retailers, they're like, yeah, I bought some studio tools and the studio tools help me to manage the studio process. But if I'm a planner or I'm a marketer, I don't know the status of that product without picking up the phone to the studio and saying, have you photographed that stuff? Yeah. Is that stuff available? So Sweft works its magic by putting everybody onto the same platform, giving them a prioritized set of work to work on. And then as things change, because things change all the time in retail, right? The weather changes, stock might be shipped, around the Horn of Africa now instead of the Red Sea because of all the issues in the Middle East. These things are impacting the launch dates, they're impacting campaigns, they're impacting studio planning all the time. So as those changes happen, what's happening is that the whole system reprioritizes the workflow so that the team knows what it needs to do next at all times. And it's that visibility into the whole process that really gives you the benefit, because otherwise what you've got is lots of disconnected workflows and lots of teams working really hard, but then everything's sort of falling down the cracks between them. And there's no visibility and no accountability as to what needs to get done.
I'm going to add to that. A key piece is that, in theory, you just need it sounds like, you just need a place where everyone can look. What's key is that everyone works in Sweft. It's not just having a place to go look for information. It's the fact that as part of your job, you're able, you doing your job helps, move the process along, provides information, triggers changes the priority immediately, or, passes the process on to the next person as you're doing your job, rather than you do your job and then you go to this other system and update it to tell it, I'm done with this part of the process. Because when you do that with, if you're looking at a system where it's primarily in one department, people have to go there to update it, you get lag because, you have islands of data, separate pieces of data, and then you have this flow of information, but you only get the information from those islands when they, get around to telling you. That means you end up with lag in the system. And so then things don't feel real time. And then everyone starts calling each other and going outside the system and using email, trying to figure out what the status of things is, because they don't know. They don't trust the system to be up to date. What's really key is that everyone, they're doing the jobs. The buyer's doing their job. When they reach a point, the planners can see what's happening. They know what's going on, and it's available to them within the system. People downstream, the marketers, everyone, they know what's going on because it's all in that same system, rather than being, that's happening in the buyer's assortment place. Yep. And I'm not going to see that until it gets into the ERP and then that gets pushed forward into the other systems where I have access.
That's great. And I guess there is some crossover with a PIM, and just to help our listeners understand, how would you typically work alongside a PIM? And then a slightly separate question, but something that I was wondering while you were talking a second ago, who is your typical stakeholder that brings the product into the business?
Good questions, Paul. I might take the last one first. I think, typically, as you say, but the stakeholder has to be a relatively senior person in the business that has responsibility really for the performance of the business in terms of particularly sales and profitability. So typically rolls up into CIO, COO type level decision makers. There's obviously quite a few stakeholders that you need to corral into a new process and that need to be happy to adopt new tools. So you need some pretty senior sponsorship in order to make these things work. But anyone really that gets some visibility into the end-to-end and cares about not just the sales number, pure sales number, but actually the efficiency and the profitability and the ability to scale the business really is a good person for us to talk to. So, most of our customers, that like I say, is a sort of CIO, COO person. In terms of how it works from a PIM perspective, well, I like to tell people that we are PIM-ish, but we're not a PIM. And the reason that I sort of put it that way is that we deal with product information, right? I mean, it's, inevitably the word product sort of then sort of draws you to, well, if you deal with product information, surely you're a PIM. But really what we do is the workflow that is associated with gathering and aggregating all of that data that then might live in a PIM. So the PIMs themselves aren't very good generally at that front-end process and that front-end aggregation. The tools that they deliver into the business tend to be sort of system of record type tools. You get nice forms with nice visualizations of the product. But when you look at how buyers and many of the other folks in the process like to work, they like to work in spreadsheets. They've got this love-hate relationship with Excel. It's sort of frustrating because it's not version controlled and there's no workflow, but it's also very flexible and I can see my whole assortment. I can see all the data that I need to see all in one go. So what we did at Sweft, which I think is really smart from Michael's perspective, is really try and replicate all the good parts of that spreadsheet interface into Sweft, so that really what you're working on is a giant multi-user workflow enabled sort of spreadsheet-like interface. So it's something that's very familiar to those folks. They're really sort of, for them, adopting Sweft is just like using the tools that they currently do, but with all the benefits of doing it on a single integrated platform. And that's not something that the PIMs do. They just don't have any empathy really for those retail teams. And as a result, those teams just don't use them. So people often put in a PIM to solve this problem and discover that everyone's using Excel anyway. And that's obviously very frustrating. So I think what we do is very much more the front end of that process. At the end of the day, the data is the data, where it needs to live. We can push it into a PIM. Some customers have a PIM because they've got a large static catalog as well as this dynamic stuff that's happening all the time. So we can work with them in that regard. And the PIM itself is often optimized to push that content into various different channels. So if you're going to do a lot of syndication, many of the PIMs have a lot more capability than we would do around where that content might end up. So you might be pushing that into Amazon, Google Shopping, various different marketplaces, that sort of thing. That isn't part of the problem that Sweft deals with. We're very much more the content production, aggregation and management of the workflow that delivers you that product record. The PIMs might then pick that up and do something else with it.
Interesting.
I'll add to that I'll add to that we, for a lot of retailers, I think we can replace, or they can use Sweft instead of a PIM if we tag onto a syndication tool that can then manage the syndication out to the other resources. But a lot of times retailers bring in a PIM only to discover that that's really not what they needed, and that there's a lot of focus in PIMs on data governance and lots of approval steps and all that kind of stuff that retailers don't really necessarily need. So it may be best for us to work alongside a PIM, and it may be also that we can be instead of a PIM.
Yeah, it makes sense. And come back to that point, James, that you made, or both of you made, about many businesses still relying on manual processes of spreadsheets. Often it's because it's like better the devil you know. It's inefficient, but it works. And I once worked for a retail group, which is like £1 billion in total retail group online. And they had an insane Excel spreadsheet with mental macros, and one person who built it and maintained it was doing all their content publishing through a CMS, only using SFTP. It's bonkers, but it worked, and they never wanted to change. So my question to you is, how do you tackle this? Because there is resistance to change, because the risk of change when you're working in larger retailers is big. So, and it's obviously complex, unpicking each bit and then turn it into a new. So how do you tackle resistance? Like, what is your way of getting people to perceive the value of this?
Well, I think it's really sort of classic, from a sales perspective, and certainly in terms of getting everyone on board to do the project and to start building the business case. It's really a question of engaging with all those teams and really understanding just not only what they're doing right now. Maybe they have that mega spreadsheet with all the macros. Maybe they have hundreds of spreadsheets, which is quite often the case when we go in there. Or maybe they've built some internal tool, which is often what's happened as well. They've tried to sort of, get an access database almost and sort of whack all the data in there. So even if it works for them in a certain sense, what you find when you start having those conversations, and Mike will attest to this, is that actually you start digging underneath it and you realize that there's no process connectivity and no collaboration. So while the data flow might work in the way that you've just described, what you lose is all the context. And we talk about this thing particularly with buyers, for example, because buyers are probably the most difficult group in the sense that they themselves are busy people. They're often working 3 months in advance of the product going live, or maybe 12 months in advance. So So for them, it's not only a question of getting the assortment right and making sure that, they're buying the right quantities and all that good stuff, but fundamentally, they also want to retain the context of what they're doing and make sure that the downstream processes understand why they bought what they bought and what the relationship of this particular item is to the assortment. And maybe there's some context and information in that around how they want it to be shot or how they want the romance copy to work or whatever it happens to be, to really make sure that assortment flies off the shelves. In order for them to do that, they then need to send loads of emails, or maybe they've got to drop a PowerPoint in, and people just forget what the context of that whole assortment building process was. So things like that get uncovered in the process. And when you start talking to those individual teams, you realize that even if it sort of works and they're sort of jerry-rigged something that will kind of get it over the line, what they're very frustrated about is their inability to collaboratively move the needle. And a lot of the things that they think are really added value, we call it the buyer's golden nugget, just get lost in the process. So yes, they've found a way to do it right now, but the more you dig, the more you discover that actually there's huge amounts of frustration. That the problem with change is the other big challenge, i.e. something happens externally, everything needs to get reprioritized. That process is completely broken, and they spend, weeks in meetings and huddles on Slack and, emails flying left, right and center, just trying to work out, okay, fine, what do we now do? So it doesn't take too much in my experience to move them from, good enough to actually, we're leaving a ton of money on the table, and we're also delivering, in a way which is totally suboptimal to the downstream processes. And of course, the folks that are downstream are all very frustrated that they don't get this information. So the more you dig, the more you uncover. But those process connectivity and collaboration issues tend to come to the fore, and then they realize that actually there must be a better way to do this.
One of the things we discovered in anthropology, and the reason for the interface that we have, is learning that the buying teams and different users were really comfortable with using Excel, and if we gave them sort of form-based interface, that they really just sort of wanted to work in Excel and then put it into the system. And there's so much danger in the inaccuracy of Excel with up to 40%, 45% I read of formulas and information being inaccurate in spreadsheets. The whole question of the austerity, logic behind the austerity effort in the UK was potentially on some bad spreadsheet data.
There was a story about a spreadsheet that didn't help.
Yeah. So that was really essential. It's like, give them some place comfortable where they don't want to pull it off and create again another little island of data. The other point I wanted to make is that when you look at those internally built systems, every retailer we talk to seems to have some internal system that they're looking to get away from, because, like you said, there's that person who built that incredible macro-based. I saw one of those at Williams-Sonoma that was just, incredible, all the things it could do. But the person who built it wasn't there anymore, and so they had all this resource around trying to figure out how do they keep this beast alive when it's the person who really understands how it works is no longer there. So we see a lot of times that those internal systems, they see a big problem, they say, okay, we're going to solve this, we're going to build the system. The IT group gets together, they build it, but it's a one-off. They're going to build it and then they're going to maintain it. But retail changes too fast. It's the buying team is all the product is changing, what's happening online changing. You need more information. You need different pieces. The online information, the stores now need more information for digital readouts, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff's happening, and that system they built is hard to change. The people who built it originally aren't there anymore, so they're desperate to get off of it, because it's in the case of one, it's like, yes, it was great when they built it, and now there's like 25 different pieces of information that don't fit through that system. So they still have to go around it to the ERP and add information manually. And there's only one person who remembers where all those pieces are. And so it's like, okay, we need something that will get us away from that and be more flexible and grow for the future, rather than just be locked into this, the single way of doing business.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've definitely seen a lot of those spreadsheets where no one wants to touch them because, like you said, the person that's built them has left the business. So final question, kind of around the roadmap and new functionality. So can you just talk us through any changes you made in 2023 that you're particularly pleased with, or your customers were really appreciated, and then any features and functionality you've got planned for 2024 that your customers will be particularly excited about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. It's the reality, isn't there, Michael? I see that if you had any hair, Michael, it would be grayer. That's the reality. But we did an awful lot of work this last year. So launched Rockler. That was a very successful project. But I think what we realized off the back of that is that we need much more configuration in the tool set. So Rockler was sort of, B1, if you like, and was a very successful launch. Michael can talk about that in a bit more detail. But fundamentally, the platform just wasn't flexible enough. So we were going into new prospect discussions and having those detailed workshops and finding that fundamentally we'd have to rewrite half of it to support, that particular process flow or some particular functional requirement that they had. So we decided to re-architect. And so we went back to the drawing board and completely changed the back-end architecture of the platform to be fundamentally completely configurable. So we have a totally flexible schema. There's no restrictions on what you can model in the product. And that means that we can actually workflow many different things, not just products. So we can workflow campaigns, we can workflow lots of different, sort of mini projects within that. We can workflow the studio process. We can workflow, all sorts of microsites and campaign launches and goodness knows what else. And that's very powerful in terms of connecting all the individual pieces together. We can also configure and set up the priority alerts and the rules and all the workflow stages in a completely configurable manner. There's a nice little process sort of workflow builder, if you like, and we can put the business rules into that and configure those nice and visually. And we can essentially give the teams that run those infrastructures the tools to manage it themselves over time as well. So it becomes a much more self-service tool with a lot more configurability. So that was a massive win. We're about to go live with a big complex retailer that will be on B2. So that's very exciting. Hopefully we'll have a bit more news on that over the next few weeks, but they're the first ones to sort of take the new platform. The new platform also gives us the ability to model the product data as a graph. And typically, product data isn't a graph. You sort of chuck it into a bunch of tables. It's all normalized in your back end. But if you have a graph, it means that you can actually start doing some very interesting things in terms of joining that data together and bringing additional analytics and insights into that. So, we'll talk about roadmap in a sec, and Michael can pick up on some of these pieces. But, the vision ultimately is that the teams that are sort of mission control for digital retail is probably the right way to put it, in the sense that we can bring together all of the data and information that those teams need to make better decisions about the assortment, the way that they're actually writing the copy, creating the media, delivering the product experience. We can integrate all sorts of functionality into the platform now in a much more seamless way, so we can connect to lots of other systems. We can put all those different messages and different integration points together. We're doing some work with Patchworks at the back end to create a connector there. So, Jim and I are having a good chat about that, which means that we can very quickly and effectively get customers up and running. And we're also building an integration solution with Amplience as well, and some of the other CMSs, because then we've got really the end-to-end. You can go from the assortment, planning and building all the way through to the promotion, marketing and delivery of that product and content and campaign onto the digital channels themselves. And that's a very exciting opportunity, but it all comes from having this significantly more flexible architecture that we've been working on. Michael, what about roadmap stuff?
So looking at that roadmap stuff, where we're really focused is on, continuing to add functionality and improve the features that we offer now. We're looking to bring in a vendor portal and some tools for sort of easing and expediting and automating the process of gathering data from various retailers, various sources from vendors, et cetera, to make it less challenging for the e-com teams and buying teams to gather the information they need. We're looking at making some enhancements in multi-language. We already have capabilities embedded in handling multiple languages, but increasing that. Looking at bringing in some DAP capabilities and looking at a big piece is going to be analytics and increasing that. And then just a lot of work continuing to build our capabilities from the back end perspective and the amount of data that we can handle and the speed with which we can serve up the information to the users.
Yeah, that's a good point on capacity. I mean, we're talking to retailers now that have 6 to 10 million SKUs. That's quite a lot of data to manage. So part of what we've done as the re-architecture was do the graph modeling, and then we're doing some work to make sure that scalability wise, we can have hundreds of actors in the system all acting concurrently across millions and millions of data points. So essentially, it becomes that kind of hub. It's the core part of the retail business operation that sort of feeds all the channels. And if we can do that in the way that we're imagining it, it really becomes, like I say, sort of mission control. You've got everything that you need. You've got total visibility across the business as to what's going on and what the status of the work is. And with all the analytics that Michael's been talking about, you can also make everyone accountable versus their KPIs as well. Because for the first time, this sort of rather opaque part of the retail operation, which everybody sort of knows is probably not optimal, but no one really understands that well. We can make visible everything that's happening in that back end, and do it in such a way that exec team and everyone else can look at that and go, okay, fine. What is the is-no status in the business? How much product's in there? How much more money could we be making if we improve that? What could we do fundamentally to improve the performance of that product when it's in channel? What's the analytics data telling us about maybe what we need to think about from a workflow perspective? And then, we've got the opportunity post all that, once we've got all those pieces in place, to bring all the clever AI stuff through. There's a lot of discussion about AI in things like product descriptions, right? Because it gives you potentially a way to generate those quite effectively, particularly if you're doing multi-language stuff. There's lots of retailers I'm talking to already doing that. They're using Excel and they're using ChatGPT to sort of bring that data through. But the problem fundamentally is that data needs to live somewhere. It's got to land as part of a workflow and a process. And so, one of the things we're doing with the Amplience integration is using all the great AI work that John and team are doing at the back end there, that we're going to bring through into the platform, so that you get a content form that can essentially write the content for you. We can bring studio tools around the images that will remove backgrounds, that will, create different versions of that content for different channels. There's lots of opportunity for automation, but I think we've got a bit of work to get all the fundamentals in place. But then I think we can completely change the productivity game as well.
Interesting. It's going to be a quiet year in 2024 for you, yeah?
Oh yeah, very quiet. It's going to be manic days, I have to say.
But excellent. We'll bring it to a close, because we've still got so many questions. I find this really interesting area. The automation piece is so important, and I definitely feel like that this year and going forwards, there will be more focus on operational efficiency. I hope so anyway. And also, I like that idea. I like what you talked about, the transparency from a data point of view, because if people can report on the impact of where things are in bottlenecks, it will lead to change quicker than when you just don't know what's going on and where things are and the scale of it. So, look, really enjoyed chatting to you both. Appreciate you taking the time. For those listening, hope you enjoyed it. We'll have links on our website to Sweft and to James and Michael, and also hit them up on LinkedIn if you've got questions, or if you want to look at the product in more detail. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to follow up and have a conversation with you. And thanks as always for everyone for listening. Keep your ears open for the next episode, and don't forget to give us that rating before you go. Until next week, everybody. For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gurd, or my co-host, Paul Rogers, via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.